it was the 5th day. Only a day and a half remained to me. On the 6th day I threw my last ounce of energy into the battle, allowing nothing whatever to sidetrack me. After the morning chores, and just before the Rashi's talk, a university student sitting near me, suddenly yelled out, "You foolish, stupid guy," referring to himself. "Go on, on. One more step, only one. The summit. Die if need be, die." The strength of his desperation flowed into me and I began to concentrate as though my very life depended on it. My mind was empty as an infant's as I listened to the Rashi's lecture. He was reading from an ancient koan. Not even a sage can impart a word about that realm of silence, from which thoughts issue. A piece of string is eternal and boundless. The bare white ox before you is pure, vivid. As the Rashi spoke in a calm, quiet voice, I felt every one of his words filter into the deepest recesses of my mind. Not even a sage can utter a word about that realm from which thoughts issue, the Rashi repeated, adding, "No, not even a Buddha." Of course. Of course. I repeated breathlessly. Then why have I been searching for such a word? All at once everything became sheer brilliance, and I saw and knew that I am the only one in the whole universe. Yes, I am that only one. Though not entirely confident the Rashi would confirm this as Kensho, I decided to present my realization to him at the afternoon Dakyuzen, anyway. "Show me more clearly," he demanded. Returning to my place in the main hall of the temple, I again attacked Zazen. About 7 in the evening I suddenly heard these words explode over my head. 30 minutes to Dakyuzen. Make up your mind to come to self-realization. This is your last chance. Again and again the blows of the stick rained down on me. My concentration became utterly desperate. At last it dawned on me. There is nothing to realize. At Dakyuzen the Rashi tested me with, "Show me Mu. How old is Mu? Show me Mu when you are taking a bath. Show me Mu on a mountain." My responses were instantaneous, and he confirmed my Kensho. Prostrating myself outside the Rashi's doorway as I left his room, I overflowed with a joy which beggared description. I cannot close this account without expressing my deep gratitude to Yasutani Rashi, who led me, so stubborn and willful, to open my mind's eye, and to all others who directly or indirectly have helped me. 7. Mrs. L. T. S. An American artist, age 51. I had come to Zen and the Pendle Hill, Pennsylvania. Sesshin obliquely and inevitably. As I look back over my shoulder at the apparent meandering of my path to the moment of realization, I see that it led straight to the sound of that tiny kinhin bell. As a sculptor, as a wife and mother, as a drunk, and finally as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, I had good pretraining. I suppose the first step in this life was the knowing, at about 15, that I must be an artist. This knowing coincided with a total rejection of Christianity and an earnest groping for truth within myself. In a few years I discovered stone, and again I knew that carving was my way. Slow and hard. As the inner groping was slow and hard. I was determined to experience as much as possible, so marriage and family followed. But in time my zest for living became throttled. Life was too much for me, it began to pinch and bruise. Then I discovered blessed alcohol, which subtly dulled my pain and unshackled my soaring spirit. Stone rested silently, untouched. My husband and children, demanding my love, were pushed aside. No sculpture. No wholehearted acceptance of family. Just pain and guilt and inadequacy. And slowly alcohol took over and controlled my life. I no longer knew my center. Life was a bad dream. Struggling from one 24 hours to the next, I was controlled by fear and guilt and the secret bottle. I would not believe that I could not find a way out. So 8 years of psychiatry and attempts at every method of self-discipline I knew of followed. But I was still trapped. One morning, which seemed no different from all the other terrible mornings, I phoned Alcoholics Anonymous for help. With this act I was at last freed to truly look at myself, and with the help of all the other alcoholics who had lived through the same hell, to be myself. I stopped drinking. I learned that there is something infinitely more powerful than my small human mind. And I knew that I must find it, know it, see it, be it. My search had begun. A few weeks later, idly looking at books on a bargain counter, I picked up How to Know God, a translation by Swami Prabhavananda and Christopher Isherwood of Patanjali's aphorisms. I was stunned. Patanjali had known and taught, perhaps 2,000 years ago, what I had just discovered for myself. This book I read and reread and studied and puzzled over for 2 months on the deck of our schooner as we sailed up the Atlantic coast and down again on a vacation trip. All footnote material was tracked down, books ordered and devoured. The deep need for a teacher was answered by my finding Swami Pramananda, who agreed to help me. He guided and directed me, started me in disciplined meditation, helped me sort out hallucinations from reality, prepared me for the great plunging effort at Pendle Hill. In the course of my reading I had found references to Zen in Huxley's perennial philosophy. This I knew was for me. I continued to read, to practice Kriya meditation, though not to sit in the Zen way. Entirely unexpectedly I was given an opportunity to go to Japan for a few months to supervise the construction of an exhibit I had designed. There I ruthlessly, persistently chased Zen. And there I was shown, as ruthlessly, that the only place to chase it was within myself. I was told to sit. I sat. I sat at sesshin at Engakuji, Ryatakuji, and briefly at Nanzenji. I sat at Ryosan and in Datakuji. It happened this way. Before leaving America I had heard of Engakuji, so there I went. When I arrived in a cold November rain, I had no idea what to do, no introduction to anyone, no understanding of Japanese. Not knowing which way to turn, I stood irresolute, absolutely alone in a gray, deserted landscape, with rain soaking through my raincoat, running down my neck, dripping into my shoes. A dark figure ran out in the rain. Helplessly we looked at each other. Words tumbled out, Japanese and English. He beckoned me to follow and led me to a door where he knocked and called. A figure appeared. It was a young Englishwoman, who, after a brisk conversation in Japanese with my guide, asked what she could do for me. She took me to the head monk and arranged for me to stay, taught me how to get through the meals, requested an interview with the Rashi, and interpreted for me. She was my guide and good friend. Her final gift was to introduce me to an American Zen student, who arranged by telephone for me to go to Ryatakuji for more sitting. So it went. On and on. Kindness from so many people, and painful sitting. Wherever I sought help in Japan, from a Rashi, a monk, or a lay student, I found it. The compassion of all these people for my floundering ignorance has been infinite, and I am so grateful. The ting of that tiny bell at Pendle Hill sesshin was the shock. The force that crumbled walls that had been gently eroding through 4 years of zazen, and before that 5 years of Kriya Yoga every day, every night. Patiently, stubbornly, I had sat. Sometimes a long time, sometimes a few minutes, but always every day. Sitting patiently had become so familiar that I accepted it as naturally and uneventfully as breathing. When I arrived at the Pendle Hill sesshin I had never seen Yasutani Rashi before. His monk interpreter I had met at Ryatakuji, where I had attended a sesshin 4 years earlier. I was braced for the physical misery of 4.5 days of zazen, but I also knew well that the reward was clarity and peace. After attending the sesshin in Delaware conducted by Nakagawa Rashi Inn, I had jotted down. I feel that I've been turned inside out, shaken, and rinsed in pure, clear water. So this Pendle Hill sesshin began. About 40 strangers sat together, some merely curious, some very earnest. Yasutani Rashi divided the group, according to their expressed purpose for being there, into several smaller groups. He spoke privately to each of the groups, explaining the discipline they were to follow during the next 4.5 days. I was one of those who sought enlightenment, and to this group he gave the koan Josh's mu. I began to sit with mu. The first day mu was no hot iron ball. In fact it was a heavy lump of lead in my belly. Melt that lead. The Rashi commanded. But it would not melt. So next day I hammered with mu. And came to know that its center was a brilliant, crystalline light, like a star or a diamond, so brilliant that it outlined and illuminated physical objects, dazzled my eyes, filled me with light. My body felt weightless. I thought, this is mu. But the Rashi counseled. Hallucinations. Ignore them. Concentrate harder. By the end of that day there was no light, just drowsiness, infinite weariness, and mu. Before going to bed I wrote a note to myself. Now I am determined. If others can do it I can too. And I will. I will exhaust every bit of strength and stubborn determination. Then I slept, with mu blanketing dreams, mu moving in and out with each breath. The third day my eyes would not stay open. With each breath they closed. When I fought this off, my mind was immediately filled with problems of my family and marriage. It was a terrible struggle against both sleep and mental torment. With each breath I was determined to get hold of mu, but it went down and disappeared into nothingness. Go deeper, the Rashi said. Question: what is this mu? To the very bottom. Deeper and deeper I went. My hold was torn loose and I went spinning. To the center of the earth. To the center of the cosmos. To the center. I was there. With the sound of the little kinhin bell I suddenly knew. Too late to see the Rashi that night, I rushed to the first dakuzan in the morning. Questions. Sharp voices. Laughter. Movement. The Rashi said. Now you understand that seeing mu is seeing God. I understood. After miscellaneous koan zazen at the Brewster, New York, sesshin several weeks later. I feel clean. I feel free. I feel ready to live every day with zest, by choice. I am delighted by the adventure of each moment. I feel as though I have just awakened from a restless, disjointed dream. Everything looks different. The world no longer rides heavily on my back. It is under my belt. I turned a somersault and swallowed it. I am no longer restless. At last I have what I want. 8. Mrs. D. K. A Canadian housewife, age 35. Canada and the United States. The early years of my life were quiet and uneventful. No tragedy touched me, and my parents were devoted to the bringing up of myself and my 2 sisters. It could almost be called an ideal childhood by most Western standards. Even from the first. Though, there were recurrent periods of despair and loneliness which used to seep up from no apparent source, overflowing into streams of tears and engulfing me to the exclusion of everything else. At these times the painful feeling